Hey everyone, before I introduce our guest, I want to remind everyone to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening. Don't forget that thumbs up button and make sure to like the episode if you have the option. I understand that not everyone has time for a 2-hour episode, and that's okay. But you have time for this one. I don't get starstruck often, but Sir Michael Hammer of God, wow. This episode gave me energy. Immediately after recording, I felt like I hadn't done enough. I was like, I've got to do more stuff. Let's not waste any time. We will pass it over to Sir Flo for the intro. We're going to dive right in.
King Cabbage Tidehammer.
And this is WAK. We got a couple of serious ones under our belt.
Slept with the king.
And you become the champion day one and walk out.
I'm surprised your beards didn't get velcroed together.
Explain that. You have to explain.
I haven't a clue.
That's why.
Some sort of LARP thing. I survived that. I'm not going to murder you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to WAK, where we discuss... I almost made it through.
You got two that were perfect.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to WAK, where we discuss topics important to the Kingdom of Winter's Edge, interview the amtgard community at large, and talk with interesting people from around the foam fighting world. This week, we have Michael Hammer of God joining us. What kingdom are you with right now, Mike?
I'm a member of the Kingdom of Polaris.
Polaris, okay. So, Kingdom of Polaris, we're so happy that you could join us today. You're one of my favorite amtgarders. I'm going to have a couple of stories to tell about you later. But before we get into all of that, you've been in the game for a very long time. Could you tell everybody how you got started in amtgard?
Sure. I celebrated 30 years in the game in 2018.
Holy cow.
Because I joined
Wow.
in December of 88.
Wow.
So it's going on 32 years pretty soon.
Wow.
And I got into the game in sort of a similar way to a lot of people, really. I mean, it was a lot smaller then and a lot different. But some of my friends who were heavily into the SCA heard about it at an event. Like a guy came up and tried to recruit him at an SCA event. And they came back to college where we're all students. This is in San Antonio, Texas, what later became the CK, Celestial Kingdom. And they told me it's this awesome thing, and we had to drive up to Austin and try it. And San Antonio to Austin's about 90 minutes. It sounded cool, but I was like, I don't know. I'm not driving 90 minutes for something that might be stupid.
Right.
And I had something else going on that weekend. I don't remember what it was. So the first week that my friends from college went, I did not go with them. And I did go with them the next week because they came back and they were so excited and they had the rule books. And then we were, throwing together whatever could pass for garb and building weapons and shields and all that. Because once, 6 or 7 people around you get excited, it's easy to get excited too.
Right.
And after that, we went and played, and hopefully some of the people still out in that Tennessee, North Georgia area know Roger Shrubstaff. He was actually my college roommate.
Yeah.
And one of those guys who went the first week. I didn't go the first week, but he did. So Andrew's been playing 1 week longer than I have.
Nice.
Yeah, so for people in Winter's Edge, you would know him as Sir Roger. He's down in Neverwinter. No, he's still up here. He's still up here with us. Doesn't post as much anymore, but was very, very active online in the online amtgard community, especially around the era of ESAM. I think he's dropped off a little bit more recently, but he's been in the game a long time.
Real life happens to us all.
It does.
Plus, you get older, it's harder to keep it up.
Yeah.
That's something happened to me.
Well, there's 200 Facebook groups for every kingdom now, so I mean, how do you
And
know
by
which
definition, he must be my age because we were in college together.
Right.
But when Barad-dûn, which was the original kingdom in South Texas, left amtgard and formed what later became the High Fantasy Society, we in San Antonio broke off and stayed in amtgard.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I'd been to clan. Like, that was the only reason that I pushed to not have the Austin group leave. And then our group decided not to leave with them, even though they were sponsoring us, because they told us we couldn't vote for whether we should leave or not.
That seems to
"You
be a
aren't even let us
recurring issue
vote.
sometimes.
We're gonna stay and ignore what you guys voted for."
Yeah, right.
So what caused that initial split, though? Why did that group want to leave to High Fantasy Society, and was it even a concern for you guys, or were you amtgard all the way at that point?
So we weren't amtgard all the way, really, because there were probably 15 of us, something. What you get with a very small new park, right?
Right.
But we'd only played in Austin. Austin was 90 minutes away, and we could go play with them easily. I'd been to Clan, but nobody else had. And one of the times we'd been to Austin with a couple cars of our guys, not everybody, but a decent number, the people from Dallas came down and were very rude. Like, they hit too hard, and they called everybody, gay slurs and stuff. They were just very rude.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is part of why the Austin group left, because the average kids who played in Austin didn't like a bunch of people coming down from Dallas and being very rude and hitting them hard.
Right.
Yeah, you can't blame them.
No, not at all. The leadership in Austin wanted to go try something different. They wanted to do a points-based GURP style rule set. And that only lasted a couple, 3 years before High Fantasy Society replaced it with a rule set much closer to amtgard back then. And, our rule sets are different enough now that you can see the kinship, but they're not that similar.
I've always wondered that. Okay.
I think High Fantasy Society now is one of the lighter touch games.
Yeah, it's now a lightest touch LARP, but it's very roleplay oriented.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of people doing it almost like not as a parlor roleplay, but close.
Yeah. Hero does that, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry to interrupt, Mike. Go ahead.
No, and High Fantasy Society is every park is sovereign, which means that they have a lot of variation.
Right.
The last time I went to High Fantasy Society in Texas, it was very amtgard-like, but it had a lot of crossover.
Huh.
That seems kind of cool.
But because they're all independent and sort of they follow the same rules, but only by agreement, there's a wide variation nationwide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you guys get started. There's the split between High Fantasy Society and amtgard. You guys ultimately decide to stick with amtgard because the people that were forming High Fantasy Society were kind of jerks. Where does it go from there?
So the next step, and there was a delay in here, but not very long. Like when the San Antonio group voted to stay in amtgard, we didn't have contact with anybody else. So it's not like we had a better offer other than we had an offer of playing with hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Because even then, Clan would have 300 people. And so you get 150 or 200 on the field. It's a whole different world than what you can do even at a big park. And the Austin Park was a big park, probably 40 or 50 people.
Wow.
But it's a lot of difference between that and 300.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was my main argument why I thought we should stay and why, in fact, I thought Austin should stay. But a week or two after the votes where they left and we stayed, I got a call. And this is, in the internet age, it's bizarre to think this is the way we used to do things. But I got a phone call from a guy I'd never met who was in Kerrville, which was 90 minutes the other way. And he'd gotten my phone number through a Burning Lander, who'd gotten it through a Colorado guy who I know. I was in college. I went home for the summer to Colorado. That's where I went to Clan with. So one of the guys I went to Clan with was an old Burning Lander. And through a friend of a friend, my number got passed around. This guy called me. And he had a little group started in Kerrville.
Okay.
And he's another very famous amtgarder, if anybody's heard of Sir Theo.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything then other than he's just a dude who played in El Paso and had a knighthood and wanted to play amtgard with us.
Right.
And the first time I met him, he said, we ought to make a kingdom with our two parks. they might not like it because they want parks to have 70 people, and neither one of us has 70 people.
Yeah.
But if we can get close to 70 between our two parks, we can probably do it. Like, this is 100% his idea. But the Celestial Kingdom came about as the first multi-park kingdom in Amtgard. And, I mean, every kingdom is a multi-park kingdom these days.
Right.
Literally, the Burning Lands is the only one left that's a single park kingdom with a static crown.
Yeah.
So the CK, I don't know that it was our intention to be a blueprint for the future, but we definitely were like, yeah, it's going to be too long for either of our groups to grow to 70. Why don't we just see if we can make it happen? And I think it helped that he had contacts in the Burning Lands and people he liked. So if they were in charge, there was a chance that he might talk them into stuff.
Yeah.
Burning Lands was like anything else back then. Sometimes one clique was in charge, and sometimes the other clique was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And the clique that didn't like him really didn't like him, but the clique that liked him liked him. So, and I was the first king of the CK for the simple reason that there were more players in the San Antonio Park than in the Kerrville Park. I mean,
Okay.
Theo ran and I ran. We had two parks in the kingdom, 90 minutes apart. There wasn't a lot of crossbreeding where people knew the other side very well. They know them a little, but not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically the reason. And I can say it now because there's a lot of water under the bridge.
Right.
But I was terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I was trying to do my best. I was a kid, so I'm not going to beat myself up too bad. But the CK probably would have been better off if Theo had been our first king. But he was our second king, and I watched, and I was like, "Oh man, I really mustered that up." So, at a later point, I did run for king of the CK, and feel like I did a very good job the second time. But that first king, I was out of my depth. On the other hand, a brand new kingdom, and any of y'all who remember the Winter's Edge Kingdom push, I'm sure you had these feelings too.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of energy. There's a lot of people who are all pulling together to make stuff happen.
A lot of pride too.
That's right. And even way back then, there was that, and I think that carried us through to a large extent.
That's amazing. I had never known that it was the first multi-park kingdom. That to me now sounds almost foreign to have an entire kingdom in a single park, but wow.
And
well, and it was only the third kingdom, so it's not like there were a lot of kingdoms like that. But the key and what made it seem like it was an actual division is the first two were single park kingdoms.
Right.
Then we were a multi-park kingdom. Then the next three after us were single park kingdoms too.
Oh. Wow.
Okay. So when there were only 6 kingdoms, a lot of them were single park kingdoms.
And so this is something that that I wanted to touch bases with you. Texas has a lot of amtgard. The greater Texas area, bleeding into New Mexico and some of the other states around it, have a lot of amtgard. Why is it that Boffer Sports were able to take off there so easily and so well in that time period?
Well, I have a couple of opinions, but I don't have enough data to say, hey, I know the answer. I can say these are my opinions, but without doing some statistical research that I'm not even sure where I'd get the numbers for, it's hard to judge. One big thing that Texas has in its favor, outside for free, and there are parts of Texas where it's just too hot in the summer. On the other hand, if you've got a lot of water and you're in the shade, there's not much of Texas where it's too hot.
Right.
Okay.
Like, it might not be comfortable, but it's not like, after an hour you just can't go anymore.
Yeah.
And places that are wetter than Texas, that does sometimes happen. Not that Texas doesn't have some humid parts, but in general, it's just got the right climate for it. And then I think it just spread organically at the right time in sort of the history of America and the world, because there's just a lot of a lot of interest in medieval and fantasy stuff, just hanging around kids in their teens and 20s.
Right.
And if they heard about the SCA, they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So
And
once you start taking off and getting a little traction, which is what amtgard got in Texas, then it's not too hard to lock it in and see that explosive growth. I think if you look, there's other parts of the world, like northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, where Belagarth is super strong, where I think the same thing happened. Okay? I don't think it's that, hey, Belagarth matches the Chicago mentality more. I don't think that's really the case. I just think what happened is they got some momentum, started rolling, and everybody wants to play with 50 people instead of 5 people, or 300 people instead of 50 people.
Right. Anywhere something starts to get momentum, it's always going to be popular there. Like, look at,
and I think
WeChat, it's really popular in Asia and Europe and things like that. We don't really use it here in the U.S.
right.
no, that's a good example. And I think that's the big reason for Texas. But again, that's an opinion without a lot of data.
Yeah. And well, one thing that I thought of as you were telling your story too, if we're looking at that time, you said you joined around 88. So 88 leading up to 95 is when you have Dungeons and Dragons starting to come back after they had some horrible mismanagement. They're putting
the satanic panic, you know.
they're putting
Is that
stuff.
what you mean by horrible mismanagement?
No, there's a whole story about what happened with that. It's hilarious. We'll talk about it off mic sometime.
Yeah.
You have third edition coming out around 94, 95, I think. So this is kind of a golden era. The fantasy late 80s are the golden age for fantasy movies.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
A lot of media coming out, a lot of exposure coming out that would favor a game like ours at that time.
Right.
You know what? I'm going to stand on a soapbox for a second.
Do it.
And I'm going to tell everybody who's listening to this, who's in their 20s, now is the time to recruit your friends into amtgard as soon as this pandemic over, because D&D has a huge resurgence at the moment.
Oh,
So everybody who's interested and excited, now's the time to get them.
I hadn't even
And
thought
as
of
a
that.
52-year-old, 53-year-old, however darn old I am right now, I can't be the guy to go do this. But all you guys who are under 20, this is a really good time to do it.
Did Michael Hammer of God just Uncle Iroh everyone in there and say, no, it must be a young idealist
No,
that takes
but it's
the crown?
a great point. I hadn't even thought of that. But you're right. All the D&D podcasts that are out, all the D&D, I guess, shows now. You've got Harmon Quest. Like, those are getting really big.
Yeah.
And post-pandemic,
Yeah, no,
people will have seen them.
It's a huge resurgence at the moment, and obviously recruiting people into amtgard during a pandemic is of no value. But they've got this vaccine coming pretty soon.
Right. I'm
So
actually in the trial for that.
Maybe by next summer, people can get out there and recruit. We're going to need the people because we're going to lose some people to the pandemic for sure. And at this point, all I can do is give those inspiring Uncle Iroh speeches. So that's what I just did.
No, that's a good point. I'm literally rubbing my hands together like a supervillain right now, thinking of like the flyers we can make. And no,
you always rub your hands together like that.
I
Are
have
you a
itchy
supervillain?
palms. Leave me alone. No, so you actually said something that I have been trying to sort of tease out from some people for a while now, and that is you mentioned that amtgard is cheaper than SCA, but in another way that's more accessible. When we had Teflon on the podcast, I asked him what sets amtgard apart from SCA and these other LARPs, and that was what I had assumed, that it's cheaper, so it's easier to get into. The materials cost is significantly less. Is there anything else that sets amtgard apart from all of these other games? Because we even have other boffer LARPs that are similar that have the same gear requirements. Is there any other differentiating factor between amtgard and Belagarth and High Fantasy Society, any of those?
So I'm going to give two answers, and they're to different questions because you sort of ask different pieces of a question.
Right.
But the first answer, the other thing that I think distinguishes us from SCA that has value to a certain part of our demographic, we are a much better place to go be athletic because you can do it all day. You can just play hard. There's no impact on your body. The exhaustion levels are much less because you're not dragging around a ton of plate. You're just fighting, and you reset lots and lots of occasions. That's not to say as SCA isn't athletic. It clearly is.
Right.
But it's not at the same level for people who just want to go hard all day. And it makes us very supportive of a stick jock mentality.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it's the only mentality in amtgard. It certainly isn't. But amtgard is strong with that mentality because it's so easy to keep repeating.
Yeah.
And I can say that virtually every single amtgarder who I knew who was good in our game, who went to SCA, rapidly became good in their game.
Yeah.
Just because the number of reps is so high.
Yeah, I mean, it's where we make the joke that it's where old sword knights go to die.
No, that's pole arms. But yes, I agree with you. So then the other answer is relative to other boffer LARPs, and I have a little experience with this. The time I was living in Wisconsin, I was a weekly Belagarth player.
Mm-hmm.
And one year I went to probably 12 Belagarth events in addition to playing weekly in my own realm.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of Belagarth exposure for 3 or 4 years there. And there was not a lot of difference between the two sports from my point of view. There was a little, you had to hit a little harder in Belagarth, but not so much that I could tell the difference.
Right.
You didn't have any magic, which, okay, I like the magic. I missed that, but it wasn't critical since the part I really like is hitting people with a stick.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And culturally, we were very similar from my point of view. There just wasn't much. I mean, there was a little bit of difference because by that time, amtgard had been around longer, so there was a noticeable graying. And in Belagarth, there just wasn't very much. Everybody was in their 20s, and the ancient guys were in their 30s.
Right.
Whereas amtgard, the ancient guys were in their 40s at that time. And now the ancient guys, some of them are going to get to their 60s, but I'm only in my 50s. That's far enough.
I mean, that's still pretty cool.
But otherwise, I thought Belagarth was very similar. I made some good friends in Belagarth. I had nothing but great experiences with their people as a rule. I mean, I guess maybe there were negatives here and there, but that's true in amtgard too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I was very positive on Belagarth, and I just did not feel like there was very much difference. I have a similar opinion of Dagahir, but I've only been to a few Dagahirs.
Right.
And same with HFS. Now, I've done a few real LARPs where the point is the role play and the fighting is completely ancillary.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Those are different. But the fighting LARPs, especially the foam fighting LARPs, I don't think there's a lot of difference.
Okay, that's fine.
If I'd have found Belagarth first, I'd have played Belagarth, and maybe I'd have had a Belagarth obsession for my whole life.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, first off, you are the first person who has ever answered that question as upfront, so that's great. And I think this kind of ties back into what you were saying about, whatever gets popular where you're at, that's the game to play, right?
I think so. And don't get me wrong, there are things I think are better about amtgard.
Mm.
As much as our award system has a ton of negatives, I think it does push our very, very best people to be probably better than some of these other organizations. It comes with baggage. I tell you, one of the things I love best about Belagarth that I wish there was a way to suck it into our award system
Mm-hmm.
is in Belagarth, every knight invents the knight trial that is appropriate for their squire.
Yeah.
I would not let Flo do that to me. No.
So basically, the equivalent of your award path is determined by the person who knows you best. Now, obviously, if you've got bad knights in Belagarth who say, drink with me tonight and you'll be a knight tomorrow. And this is a thing that actually happens in a few cases. Yeah, that's pretty crappy. but we got crappy knights too. So I'm not judging them.
Fair.
I'm just saying I think that's really cool. Some of my best experiences in amtgard have been, training my squires, helping them, helping mentor them through life in amtgard. And I would love being able to do some of that kind of customization. But I understand it doesn't tie into what we're doing, and I like what we're doing.
Right.
I don't want to sound entirely mealy-mouthed because I do think there are real advantages to our game, but I'm not prepared to say we're better at everything because it just doesn't look that way to me.
Right. That's fair. Okay, so let's get back to the I guess the timeline. Good Lord. So you started in 1988, and if AmptWiki is correct, which dubious, but if AmptWiki is correct, you got your first belt, Order of the Crown, in 1991. So that's just 3 years. Is that for your work founding the kingdom, the Celestial Kingdom, or what ties into that?
So the answer is kind of, but the real answer is no. It was the Wild West back then.
Fair.
Comparing what happened 32 years ago to amtgard knighthood now, it's not a fair comparison.
Right.
Many Kaporas, including the CK Kapora, which was cobbled from the other two that existed, said if you step down as monarch, you get a crown knighthood.
Oh, wow.
Like, it was just that simple. I stepped down as monarch. I somewhere around this house, I have an award blank, and it's only cool because it's a curiosity, right? We've got scrolls on our walls. Maybe y'all don't keep them on your walls, but I do. I've got scrolls on my walls.
Flo has his on his wall in the other room.
I do.
This one's not on my wall, but it says on our award blank. It says, and it's a form with some scroll work on the side, and then handwritten on it.
It's not from a dot matrix printer or anything.
No. I think it's a Xerox of something hand drawn and then colored.
Wow.
But the part about this that makes it unique is it says, I award unto Michael Hammer of God an Order of the Rose, Champion of the Realm, Knight of the Flame. Knight of the Crown, I mean. So all three of them are on one 8.5 by 11 award blank.
That's really cool.
So Cabbage pulled up some of the things that were going on around there, and this is particularly interesting for people of Winter's Edge. So Michael was knighted in February. In March, Nevron got his belt, and that name won't mean a whole lot to any of you at first, but Nevron was Squeak's knight. Squeak was Sir Kazan's knight. Oh, wow. So this is an interesting chain here that leads to one of our current players. And it looks like your friend Theo got his belt the very next month after that in April.
That would have been his second belt, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is remind my knight how old he is. So I'm just going to point out that Sir Michael got his first belt before I was even born. I was born a month later in March. Holy shit. No, that's awesome, though. So, I mean, stepping down, you get a belt. That's obviously not how we do it anymore. But, I mean, you've been in the game long enough to make up for it.
Well, and I will tell you a story. And I mentioned before that I was a little ashamed of the job I did as king.
Mm-hmm.
That belt was part of it.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Right? I mean, even then, knighthood raised an eyebrow. It wasn't quite as awe-inspiring to new players as it is now because there were just less total players.
Right.
And, something that takes 3 years to get isn't the same as something that takes on the average 8 or 10.
Right.
On the other hand, it still had cachet. And I was like, man, I got this thing that has a fair bit of cachet, and I totally can see that I didn't earn it.
Yeah, that bothered me. That can be an awkward place, yeah.
That bothered me. I mean, no one brought it up, probably because the rule book said what it did.
Sure.
But I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I got to do King again and do it better. I will tell you that probably the sixth King of the CK,
mm-hmm.
I think that's right. The sixth King of the CK was terrible. Like, genuinely a really bad king. He was in jail during his mid-reign.
Holy shit!
He didn't do he didn't do much of anything useful as king. Obviously, he missed his mid-reign. And he nearly got suspended afterward, except that nobody got suspended back then. What he did would have gotten him suspended today for sure.
Right.
But he was genuinely terrible.
Man.
And he still got his crown knighthood because the rule book said he had to.
Oh, see, now that is awkward because even if you did a great job, you're lumped in with that guy.
Well, no, like I say, the CK fixed that after him.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that was the straw, huh?
Yeah, it'd have to be.
Yeah, I mean, we all knew it was a thing that could happen, and then it did happen, and everybody's like, all right, this is a problem.
Right.
And I just know what happened in the CK, but I bet there were similar experiences everywhere. And pretty soon the internet came along, and we were able to learn from other people's mistakes, not just our own.
Right. Well, and I imagine a lot of people were learning from your mistakes, from your kingdom's mistakes, because you're one of the earliest kingdoms. So, Neverwinter pops up and we suddenly get to see everything that you guys did.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah. So you go from Crown in 91, I guess that's when you stepped down at some point, and then to Sword in 92. Tell us about that, and has the sword path changed? Has it gotten harder since then? I know the quality of fighters has improved, but everyone I talk to says you're one of the best fighters they've ever experienced. So, I mean, your opinion's going to be pretty high ranking here.
So, first, thank you. That's very nice of you. And second, those people are imagining me 6 or 8 years ago because I was very sick and escaped death narrowly in 2016.
Oh shit.
And I was already not quite as good as I used to be in 2016. And after that, I am noticeably not good. I mean, I'm not terrible. I was a sword knight. I was a warlord. I was very good at one point. So me at not my best is still not terrible, but I am noticeably not good. Like Flo could probably take me apart without working at it very hard.
Well, Flo is gearing up for a sword belt run as well.
I am, yeah. And
well, I'm just basing that on the last time I fought you, Flo, so you're probably even better than that. But
so I was actually one of the ones telling stories about you to Cabbage here. And so this was I want to take a kind of an aside here to talk a little bit about this. Back, I don't remember what year it was that Sword Knight Boot Camp starts. And I want to say it was around 2010 or so. Does that sound right?
Is that right? No, that's only 10 years. We've had 20. So we went to Atlanta in 2002 or 2003.
Yeah. So
it has to be 2003 we went to Atlanta.
And it was a year before that because we actually drove out to the first one that was in Colorado.
Colorado?
Yeah.
So Atlanta was 3.
Oh, okay.
We did Dallas in between.
Oh, that's right, at Tanglewood
and
Forest.
Glenn came to Dallas. I remember you guys coming to Colorado, and Glenn told us he'd get us a bid for Atlanta if we'd come to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very soft spot for Atlanta because that's why SKBC became a national thing. Right?
Okay.
We did Dallas because we knew people and they had the site that was basically super cheap.
Yeah.
And we were like able to say, hey, we can run an event on our own, even at a remote distance. But Atlanta was the very first time that somebody said, we'll run the event for you if you just come and run the classes. And we said, now this is a model we can farm out and do it a different place every year. So I have a soft spot for Atlanta on that basis.
I'd love to see another SKBC in Atlanta, though. That would be...
Well, we've done 2 in Atlanta. I mean...
Yeah, they did.
Do a third one.
In 2016, when I was sick, they went to Atlanta.
Damn it.
I know because I'm in the hospital, and they had to get Cedric, who was the original Crown Knight on the WAK team.
Mm-hmm.
They had to get him to come back, even though he'd quit amtgard probably about 5 years before.
Yeah. WAK, by the way, for the listeners, was 5 warlords and a Crown Knight, and Cedric was the Crown Knight in there.
Yes, it was originally 4 warlords and a Crown Knight. Then it was 5 for a while. Now the numbers no longer match, so it's just an acronym that means the SKBC Organizing Committee.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so we go out to Colorado. Sir Gillen says, hey, they're going to be holding this thing called Sword Knight Boot Camp, and some of the best fighters in the entire game are going to be there, and I really want to go. And so 4 of us pile into his Isuzu Rodeo, whatever it was, and head out there.
I remember that thing, yeah.
Yeah. And
Didn't it catch on fire in a Home Depot parking lot, or is that a different car?
No, that was the one.
Okay.
There's amtgard stories.
Yeah.
Trying to get to an event when you have no money and bad transportation and everything else. So,
Oh God, I remember those days.
yeah, right. We get there, and we meet Leaf, we meet Spin, we meet all of these people. But the one that the one person that I meet that really starts making a difference for me is you, Mike. And I think I've told you this story before, but I will tell it again here. Michael has a unique ability. I'll even call it his superpower. When he is on a ditch line, it doesn't matter whether he's having a good day or a bad day, whether he is the strongest fighter on the field or one among many really good fighters on the field. He creates this environment where hatred cannot survive. He is friendly, he's laughing, he's making jokes, he is putting forth this situation where when people get really, really mad, they stand out even more than they normally would. And because everyone is in such a good mood and everyone's laughing, instead of doing what I've seen some fields do, which is just kind of silently take it and go, that guy he gets mad sometimes. People will speak up. They'll say, hey man, you need to go sit down. Hey man, you need to do this. Or Mike himself would say that, and it made events so much fun. It is one of the reasons that Mystic Glade began traveling more out west. I mean, that's where all of the good fighters were, so we wanted to, of course, fight them.
Right.
But we weren't in this situation where everything was always horrible and dark and moody. And when you get a whole lot of super competitive people on the field, it can get like that sometimes, right? Anyone that's ever played jugging can tell you that, as fun of a game as that is, it can bring out the worst in people.
Yeah.
And it was one of the things I always loved about you, Mike. I emulated it when I got back and have gotten better at it over the years because I think that it makes for a better amtgard experience overall. So as much as I learned from the fighting itself, what I took away most was that one person can make a difference. One person can change the entire atmosphere of a ditch line, and it's not hard. It just takes work.
Right.
Boy, that's like the nicest thing that somebody said to me in quite a while, and I appreciate it. I will tell you that some of that is a conscious choice because I believe that you want amtgard to be welcoming. Mm-hmm. But some of that is that the place I feel the most at home, the most just in tune with the world, where the world is right and everything is golden, is on the ditch field. My friend Delos made a T-shirt once with the slogan "Heaven is a ditch field and the right flank is my home," and that's obviously not literally true, but in some ways that is true for me, and I know it's true for James too. So I'm not calling out of school when I say it's his slogan.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy for me to be upbeat on a ditch field because man, I love this fucking game.
Right. All right. So most at home on the ditch field. Excuse me. So that translates into a sword belt just a year later then.
Though that's true, and I'll tell you that's still the Wild West, right? Most kingdoms, then, you got a sword knighthood for being 2 out of 3 of Warlord, Weapon Master, and Defender.
Mm-hmm.
So Defender, you step down as champion. Weapon Master, you win a Weapon Master tournament. And Warlord was hard. But I got it out of the 2 that weren't that hard. And I'm not saying I wasn't good. Back then in the CK, there were probably 2 or 3 people better than me.
Sure.
But one of them was the GOAT, so that doesn't really count. I mean, it does really count, but it's worth noting he's the GOAT.
The goat. Who is this? Who?
It's a joke. I'm not sure Arthon is the greatest of all time, but Arthon
okay.
is very, very good, and his friends call him the GOAT as a
I
joke,
got you.
including me.
Someone else, by the way, another one of those people that can be very good, very skilled, a great teacher, devastating on a ditch field, but is also friendly, easily approachable, fun to be around. Sounds like CK was a fun place to be around that time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're laughing
because
with
it's
me.
a lie.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I will tell you something that is true, and I don't want any of your younger audiences to worry, because AmpGuard's not like this at all anymore.
Right.
They've heard a lot of stories of AmpGuard's not like
AmpGuard,
Salazar popped the
AmpGuard-
lid off that. Yeah.
AmpGuard back then had a little bit of the prison yard about it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not a lot, but a little. So people who weren't in the right company, you didn't really want to associate with them. And you didn't really want to walk around them unless you had friends. And it's just a little bit like that. Not really like that, but a little bit. And the Torches, who've been good friends of mine forever, including Arthon,
Mm-hmm.
and a few of my friends who were Tiger Clan at the time were sort of the college boys in this crowd of sort of hard guys, And I'm not saying they were bad guys. A lot of them weren't, but some of them were, and they were willing to be hard. And we were goddamned unwilling to let people drive us out of this thing we loved to death just because they were hard. So we did we're just going to be really good. And if they try and hurt us, we're going to humiliate them. And that'll be better.
Beautiful.
And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I am very glad that AmpGuard has no more of this. Or very little of it. But it was definitely true. I mean, at Clan 10, they didn't suspend the guy who knifed his company bro.
Holy shit.
Is it
because it happened in company?
Or the company bro who was beating the crap out of him, causing him to knife him. Neither one of those guys got suspended, and they only got their belts taken because every knight on site shamed them.
Now, is this Claw Legion at the time?
No, these guys were Corsairs.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
But, I mean, it was... I'm going to tell this story because it's one of my favorite stories.
Please.
So this is Clan 10, and I had my shiny new... So this would have been 93. And I had my shiny new belt. I'd just been a knight for a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to Clan, and sometime in the middle of Clan, they decide to call a night circle of all the knights at Clan. And there were about 50 of us, which... if you were to call a circle of all the knights at Clan now, it'd be 3/4 of the people there. It'd be unbelievable. But back then, it was a pretty small percentage of the 300 or 400 people there, 50 of us. And they said, hey, this is what happened. One guy was mad at another guy for some bullshit, and he started beating the crap out of him, even though they were friends and company brothers. And after getting beat the crap out of him for a while, he stabbed the other one. And the guy who got stabbed was back on site, but he was heavily bandaged because he'd had to go to the emergency room.
Yeah.
And it was obvious to all of them that this guy was bandaged the fuck up, and he'd definitely been stabbed.
Yeah.
And the Burning Lands leadership, who was Claw Legion, but they weren't involved, said, hey, we've got to take these guys' belts because this is not what amtgard knighthood should mean. And the two guys involved were like, yeah, the rulebook doesn't say anything about that. You can't take our belts. Screw that. And they're like, well, let's see what the knighthood thinks. So they're sort of giving every one of us, there's 50 of us, a chance to voice our opinion on this thing. And it was, at that point, I was trying to be serious and I thought it had meaning. But in the end, it was pretty stupid because we're going around this circle and everybody's saying the same thing. If amtgard knighthood means anything, you can't knife a motherfucker and keep it. Like, everybody's saying this, right? We're going around. But they don't care. These two are just like, whatever. And I admit it, when I got my chance to speak, I didn't say anything smart either. I said the same thing everybody else was. We get about 3/4 of the way around this circle. And this guy, whose name was, I think his name was Caleb. But anyway, he was a guy I didn't know very well at all, out of the Golden Plains, and not somebody I personally liked. But he stood up, and he wasn't wearing a belt, but he was wearing a chain around his neck. And he said, this is stupid. If this is what amtgard knighthood means, I don't fucking want it. And he throws his chain into the center of the circle. Whoa. All right, so then everybody's taking off their belts and chains. Everybody throws their shit in the circle and walks away. Like, that was the end of that bullshit.
That's intense.
Wow.
And and I'll be honest, my belt was brand new, and it was a gift from a friend of mine. So instead of throwing it in the circle, I rolled it up and put it in my pocket. I was like, all right, I agree with these people. Yeah. amtgard knighthood's not for me if this is what it means, but I'm not going to throw away a gift from my friend.
Right.
That's fair.
Okay. And probably 40 minutes later, the one who'd been beat up but done the knifing comes walking up to me, and he's got a double armload of belts. And he's like, all right, we've decided to set our belts aside for a while. He didn't even say for a while. He said set our belts aside. Please, will you guys take your belts back? Somebody told me you're one of the knights. And so I had to tell him, hey, I've got mine in my pocket, but that's okay.
Right.
But apparently the two of them wandered around and gave all the belts back to everybody and ended up taking their belts. But they didn't even get suspended. I mean, I understand amtgard's grown and improved a long time since then. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's a good way to think about how it was. And the CK was the same as every place else. Like, the first three kingdoms were all full of hard boys. Not that there weren't some college kids too, but they were all full of hard boys. And that stopped being true with like kingdoms 5, 6, 7. There just wasn't as much of that. There were more a mix of kids who were D&D nerds, and those people were more interested in just playing amtgard. And it helped us grow up.
Yeah.
I mean, that story has a weird, I don't want to say happy ending, but the ending was way more adult than I thought it would have been.
Yeah.
Like, they actually willingly set their own belts aside and said, we want the game to be this thing, we want knighthood to be this thing that matters. That's actually, I mean, yeah, suspension's probably still in order, but like, that's...
No. In the end, we shamed him into it. But the part of that story that I think is less, I mean, I agree with you. It's more good than bad. I probably wouldn't tell it if it had been all awful.
Fair.
But the part that bothers me, the part about it that's bad, is there's 50 of us.
Right.
And 35 or 40 of that 50 spoke before somebody was smart enough to figure out the obvious freaking solution.
Right.
And I mean, we all got it once the obvious solution was presented. We're all like, oh yeah, that's the obvious solution. But it took a long time to get to the obvious solution. And I'll give Caleb credit every time I tell the story, and I try and remember his name, even though he wasn't a guy I personally liked very much. Because that day, in as much as amtgard knighthood has any meaning, he saved it.
Yeah.
Wow. That's huge.
Unsung heroes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So you mentioned Tiger Clan as you were telling that story, and we were talking about some of the other companies that were around at that time, with Claw Legion kind of leading Burning Lands and things like that. How did you get into your fighting company? Did you start it?
I did not, in fact, start it. I've been a member of it for 30 years now, almost. But some of the earliest recruits we had in San Antonio were adult gaming nerds. They were probably 5 or 6 years older than us. Not a lot, but a little bit older than us college kids.
Mm-hmm.
And they came into amtgard and thought it was cool. And they decided they were going to make a fighting company because there were a few fighting companies starting out then. And it was a thing where maybe we'll have fighting companies in the CK. It's cool. They've got them going in other kingdoms. And Theo, who had a lot of experience in the Burning Lands, had started an Nihilus then. So we had one big fighting company already. And so these three guys decided to start a company. And they decided they were going to call it Tiger Clan. And they founded it before they went to clan, but not much. And then they went to clan and decided that fighting companies were awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And they, in fact, signed up to be a tribe of Saracen for Tiger Clan for... It couldn't have lasted more than a couple of months because I don't think anybody ever took it seriously. But they decided they came back and they're like, yes, we're Tiger Clan and we're part of the Saracens, which is a big game-wide company. And honestly, I didn't care much about that part of it, but my friends from college thought this Tiger Clan thing would be fun. And so I joined with my friends, same as everybody does.
Right.
And the friends I joined with were out of amtgard within a year. But by then I'd recruited a few younger guys into Tiger Clan, and one of them was my first squire, and I was like, I'll stay with them. And then the older gamers who'd started it left, and it was just me and the kids, and that's basically what it was the whole time we were in the CK. And I think I would have absolutely, obviously been a torch if Tiger Clan hadn't existed, but I'm a loyal guy. And,
Yeah.
you know, the fact that the torches have been my close friends and some of my very closest friends forever, I'm still a loyal guy. In fact, I will say Arthon is the very first friend I made in amtgard.
Right.
Oh, really?
He played in Austin when I was playing in San Antonio, and one of the first times I went up there and played, I think it may have been the very first time, he was a genuine Alka-Seltzer chewing barbarian, and I just liked the guy. And, you know, we've been friends ever since.
That's awesome.
Oh, did he? No, please tell me that's not just an analogy or euphemism or something. Please tell me that he crunched down on some Alka-Seltzer and then ran out onto
God,
the
I
field.
hope not.
Of course he did. And let's be truthful. He wasn't the only one back then. There were a few of them. Probably, probably I knew 3 or 4. Not 0. Not 1. I knew a few.
not 0. Shit. Oh God. I have never seen someone do that, but
well, I think
that's Paragon shit.
I think we're not as committed to role play as we used to be. You know?
That's why I'm saying it's Paragon shit. That's your new bar.
So Sir Squeak, Kazan's Knight, I mentioned earlier, told me of a story of one of the really early clans, speaking of Alka-Seltzer chewing barbarians, where we used to have battles called Knights and Squires versus the World.
Oh yeah, that's a terrible idea. But yes, yes we did.
Winter's Edge won't be familiar with this, but I mean, these were a big thing. And she was telling this story of one particular clan where they built a castle out of hay bales and had all of the Knights and Squires inside of this. And
I remember that one.
Yeah, the way that they ended up breaking it up is because this was full class, everyone that was on the world side went barbar. And they literally had, 2 people with their hands laced together standing beside one of the walls, and one of them would hit the barbarian, and the other one would alley-oop him into the castle in fight after death. And it reached a point where they said that the knights and squires that were inside the castle just had made like a crowd surfing shield wall. So they would get They would get thrown into this castle and then would get crowd surfed all the way across it and just dumped out unceremoniously on the other side as they were flailing like turtles on their backs.
That's beautiful. Oh my god.
Well, and that was
Pay money.
that
to
was
see
the that was the worst Knights and Squires battle I ever participated in, and I stopped doing them after that because even if the numbers are pretty solidly against the Knights and Squires, you've done a real bad thing because you've taken. It's not necessarily that you've taken all the best fighters, although you probably have.
Right.
Not even necessarily that you've taken the best class players, although again, you probably have.
Right.
But by definition, you've taken all the leaders.
Right.
Everybody who really gets the game and understands it and wants to do well at it because they love that part of it, you've taken all of them and put that out on one team. It's very hard for that to be fun for the other team. Just very, very hard.
It is. And I mean, another way to look at this too, and one of the reasons that I never particularly cared for them, even when I was a squire still, is there's a lot of people that strive for knighthood. It's the brass ring for a lot of people. It's almost everyone that we've had on the show so far has told their memorable story of the first person that they saw get knighted and what it meant to them and something like that. You're separating this out into something that is demonstrably not fun for half the populace. I don't know if I know of many stories from any kingdom, and I collect stories from all of the kingdoms. I don't know of many where the world won and it was fun. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the world win a few times, but it wasn't fun.
Right. Right. So you're pitting people. You're kind of pitting people against their idols, but not in this crazy fun way where it's a battle game and they have some cool objective they're going after. It's more just a mosh, and I'm glad that we've kind of moved past that.
Yeah, and it's I mean, the key to winning a game where you have numbers but they have skill is to bring your numbers to bear.
Right.
And it requires leadership to do that. And you just have to have people who understand how the game works well enough and can inspire other people to make that happen. And those world teams, they had a few people who understood it well enough and maybe a few people who could inspire, and it was never enough to get stuff done.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the last one I participated in. It was certainly the worst one that I was part of. Which is terrible because the castle that they had that year was the first really good castle I played with. Like, it was a great prop, and I hate to see somebody waste a good frickin' prop.
Yeah, that's fair.
So you've joined Tiger. Yep. And there's these other fighting companies around. You mentioned earlier that this was. Amtgard was a different place then. There was a lot of more serious people in. Would it be fair to use the word scarier people that were doing a lot of the big fighting company stuff back then? I mean, people getting sent to jail for stabbing people and things like that.
So it was definitely harder. I mean, that's just a fact. Was it scary? Not much, but I was a 20-year-old. 20, you're never freaking scared.
Right.
Yeah.
There were definitely times when I was like, you know what? I should not go over to an eyeless camp right now because who knows what a bunch of drunk guys who maybe don't like me are going to do. I did have a guy who I thought of as not a friend, but a guy I liked. He'd been in my house and played cards with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Come up to me on a ditch battle and grab me and start yelling me and threatening me.
Jesus.
Because of something that he had heard from somebody else. And, it was literally mostly because he was in the company that didn't like the company I was in. That was mostly the reason he did it.
Jesus.
And he was drunk. I mean, that was part of it too. But
Mm-hmm.
that was stuff that did happen, and I was lucky because I was a large, popular white man.
Fair.
So if I have one story, somebody who doesn't have all those advantages I had probably has 6 or 10. Or they just stopped playing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what was the company scene like then in those early days? We talked about the Saracens. People in Winter's Edge know the Saracens. We of course had our local Saracen clan here for a little while.
People who pay attention to the wider amtgard community know the Saracens too, because they've recently imploded.
Oh,
yeah, it's a whole thing.
The Claw Legion was around. You had Tiger Clan. What was did they have company battles back then? When did fighting companies make the move from being this kind of background cool thing to being a whole event centered around whether your company is better than another company?
So, the answer is there was always a sort of desire to make fighting companies into that, right? It makes sense. The word fighting company, it sounds like a mercenary company
Right.
from your favorite literature, and you should go do this thing as a group and fight together, and so even some of Spring War was started as an event with the intention of being like a clan for Texas.
Okay.
It wasn't really started that way exactly. It was started because the Burning Land said, we're going to come attack the CK because we don't like the CK.
Beautiful.
No, that's totally true. And I was king at that time, but I was the one who, after that first potato war, said, oh yeah, we could make this an annual thing and it would be awesome. And from maybe not that first one, but certainly from the second one, monarchs of the CK sometimes had to negotiate with their own fighting companies to fight with them at Spring War. Because the fighting company's like, we're not going to fight with you unless you give us a case of beer.
Yeah.
It was mostly in fun, but not completely.
Right. You have to buy them out a little bit.
So from the beginning, there was some of that. The whole events thing around fighting companies really had its heyday in the late 90s, early aughts, I think. And it was the first place I was really cognizant of it was Banner Wars.
Yeah.
Emerald Hills ran Banner Wars, and Banner Wars was explicitly a game of bring the best company you can. They even had rules that you weren't supposed to. You were all supposed to be in the same company, and that's another rule that we basically cheated. We made a team, called it a team instead of a company, and the requirements were everybody had to have matching tunics. So we just made frickin' tunics.
Yeah.
And so Golden City All-Stars was born just because we wanted to compete in Banner Wars without having to all be in the same company.
And Ben stitched all of those together originally, didn't he?
Yeah, the first set was all Clolibus. But yeah, I mean that was part of, they were trying to make it required that the companies, and when it was 18 players on the field, they sort of had only the big companies able to be successful. But then they eased it up a little bit and said, hey, you have to have 18 players, but only 12 of them have to have matching tunics. Huh? And then, it's really only 12 from your company and everybody's filling in. And that was closer. But the Rising Winds, which was an offshoot of the Emerald Hills, bought into it very hard because they inherited a couple companies out of Dallas, and they had some people who went to Banner Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So the Rising Winds was super big on it, and that populated out. I know Golden Vale got it, and I don't know if Golden Vale got it direct from Burning Lands or something. They were Burning Lands descended originally, but I don't know where they got it. There's all kinds of things that went on in the Midwest when I lived in Texas and Colorado that I have no idea about, other than I heard stories about them when I moved to the Rising Winds. But the Rising Winds had a history of being big on company battles for many years.
Yeah. So this is about when I get in amtgard. Is these late 90s, early aughts, and this shapes my view of amtgard greatly because I'm coming in and we're hearing the big company for us at the time was Rogue, because Rogue had somewhat recently split off into the Justicars and into my fighting company, the Triads.
Yep.
And so having the Florida Rogues, which became the Triads, and their stories coming from the Midwest, that was kind of where my path to back to the West and our original trips out there came from. Is Golwyn and Cho and Stinkfoot said, you need to go fight these people. You need to see what good fighting looks like. We're not good fighters. They're good fighters.
Well, and while I'm shouting out great amtgarders, Spin may have had some asshole-like tendencies, but he was very serious about fighting and very serious about training. And that made him just a fantastic resource. It really did.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'll always go down as, for me, as one of the most technically perfect fighters in our game. I always viewed the big battle that we envision him and Leaf having as the difference between, Leaf being extremely naturally talented and also working hard to get where he was, and Spin maybe not very naturally talented. I didn't get to see him a whole lot when he was younger, but definitely practice and drill and devising the best training routines for muscle memory and things like that. So
we talk about this. We've talked about this at SKBC for years, and there is a legitimate division between instinctive fighters and thinking fighters, although it does oversimplify greatly because, and I consider myself more on the instinctive side than the thinking in a lot of ways. But the fact is, nobody has an instinct to hit their friends with foam. You only get that instinct by practicing a hell of a lot.
Yeah, that's fair.
So Leroy's ability to just do the right thing very often was because he practiced so goddamn much, starting at the age of 12 or 13.
Jeez.
I mean, I knew Leroy from when the first year he'd been in the game, because I had friends in Colorado. I grew up in Colorado, so I went back 3 times a year my whole life. And he was so gifted, not because he was just born lucky. He was born with some athletic gifts for sure. I mean, tall is always an advantage, as you know, Flo. But the fact is, mostly it was practice. And saying that Spin was a very intellectual fighter or a very analytical fighter, it's true, but it doesn't ignore how much practice he puts in. All the analytics in the world doesn't do you any good if you haven't got the instincts. And the same with Leroy. Leroy might know the right thing to do in his muscle memory a lot of times, but you still have to analyze who you have to fight how, right? There's still a level of analysis. So it's a useful discussion, and I enjoy having it. But you can't really divide people as cleanly as we sometimes do. That's, by definition, sort of a shorthand.
Yeah. I mean, That makes sense.
I remember when you and Leaf and I don't remember everyone else that was with you came up to Goldenvale for GE 4 or 6 or something.
Oh, that was glorious.
And Leaf killed everyone on the ditch field. I don't mean that he beat a lot of people. I mean the ditch went down to where it was just him on one side versus almost 40 people, and he won. He won a ditch. I've never seen it done before. Not since.
No, Leroy was a pretty magical fella, and he was a damn nice guy.
He was.
I'll give the guy credit. That trip was one of my best amtgard memories because we basically took 6 of us and only one. I guess it was 7, and 2 of the 7 weren't warlords from the Iron Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So we were traveling deep, and the Iron Mountains was good then. The Iron Mountains was a hotbed of very talented fighters. And so we rolled in, and it was sort of unfair what most of us could do to most of the people there in Golden Vale.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Although, now that I've said only lovely things about Leroy, I'm going to tell a nasty story about Leroy.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. Okay.
From that event.
Leroy is Leaf, right?
Leaf.
Yes.
Leaf.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Some of these guys were close enough friends of mine, it's hard to remember to not call them by their real name.
No, I completely understand.
But we're doing this competitive ring the bell.
I remember this.
5-man ring the bell tournament. And we were quite a bit better than most of the other teams.
Yes.
We were quite a bit better than all the other teams.
It's 5
But the
warlords.
fact is, the second best team was a Florida team.
Yeah. I was on that team.
And they were threatening. Like, we felt like we should beat them, but they were threatening. And they got a point on us. I think they got the first point.
I remember this.
We weren't upset. We were upset. So Thor and I we're frustrated. We're like, how the fuck did that happen?
Right.
So we walk over to Leroy and we're like, what the fuck? Do you want to switch up? You gonna be able to handle that guy? And he's like, yeah, it's sorted. We're like, what do you mean it's sorted? He beat your ass. No. I just didn't notice he was a lefty.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think he may have lost to Glenn twice before he noticed he was a lefty. But I know that Thor and I were ready to read him the riot act, and he's like, no, it's sorted. I just realized he's a lefty.
Yeah, I just have to calibrate a little bit. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
And he did fix the problem once he realized he was a lefty.
I remember this battle for 2 reasons. One, I got to stab Thor every point. I was running pole for that team. I hadn't even picked up Florentine. That was a long distant dream. And I had my brand new pole that I had just now made that was 1,000 feet long, horrible. It had a monster noodle connector at the end.
Jeez.
With a cut Nerf ball. So the tip of it was, 2 feet. And I come up against... I remember throwing it out at Thor and Thor blocking it. And it was kind of one of those Matrix moments where I saw him look down at it and just make this face of total disgust as he's blocking it to the side.
I know that face.
But no, I mean, the thing was, it weighed so much that once you got it, if you could get it moving, there was no stopping it, right? So I remembered stabbing Thor quite a bit there, and as a new player, that was fun for me. The other thing that I remember is the first time that I realized that, because I knew that the people we were fighting were better, and at no point were we under the delusion that we were going to win. We wanted to score a point. That was it. We went in saying this is our win condition. And we did lose. But what I remember was... Michael was running pole for at least part of that time. And so I was watching him and kind of mirroring. One of the jobs of the pole is to make sure that the other pole isn't flexing his power unchecked.
Right.
And Mike, I remember going back after one of the points and saying, I think that Michael Hammer of God got bored because he killed everyone on our team, all 5 of us, just in quick succession, very, very fluidly. And I said, I'm going to try it this time. So I'm gonna mimic him, and I'm gonna do some of the stuff that he's doing. And the point starts. This is a ding the bell, right? But we're playing on a jugging field, about the same size as a jugging field. And so we start up, and I make it to about half court, and have decided that I'm about to make my first move. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and Leaf is standing behind me. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and said, "The point's already over, buddy. We just now won the game."
Oh, no. Oh,
Well,
God.
But that has to have been after Leaf sorted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, after he sorted it, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a great trip. It's special. I missed that part of, a bunch of guys who just don't have anything better to do than travel across the country and hit people with foam. It's glorious.
I mean, there are worse hobbies.
It was one of the first times that you and I got to sit down.
It's been wonderful to me.
Yeah, right? It was one of the first times you and I got to sit down and talk as well. You had a park from Knoxville that had petitioned to join the Iron Mountains.
They were in the Iron Mountains for a long time.
Yeah, and
not a long time, but a couple of years.
Yeah, and so this was, and you and I sat down. This is another one of those things that kind of gets burned into your memory. So Goldenvale was having their court, and they had served chicken, and me and Mike and all of these other sword knights that were my idols are all sitting around in a circle, and I'm covered in chicken grease. And
as is tradition.
Yeah, and so Michael's sitting beside me, and he's talking to me a little bit about this group and just getting some more information. And I'm super excited, young amtgarder, and I'm telling him everything that I know. And he's getting this more worried look for reasons that we've gone over before on the podcast. That the other group had some issues going on, but Goldenvale, while they're having court, they bring someone in tied to a pole, like arms and legs looped around it, tied, and they're carrying...
Like it's a luau.
Yeah, like it's a luau. And I remember Michael looking up and going, "Hey, do we need to do something?" And he looked over and saw that the person had on elf garb and the ears, and he turned back to me and said, "Flo, it's fine. It's just an elf." And continued on with the conversation like nothing had happened. And I'm 18 at the time. I'm like, yeah, I guess it's just an elf. It's okay.
Oh my God, probably fine.
It's sad to think of the damage I may have unintentionally done. I mean, the key is that whole Elven Court role play that was going on in Goldenvale at the time was a thing I didn't understand or want to understand, but I knew it was a thing that everybody was into, so I was like, it's probably harmless.
Right. So we've talked about... Oh, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Sorry. So we've talked about the Iron Mountains a few times. We've brought them up, and your, I guess, most recent belt was from Iron Mountains, but I've also heard from a few folks that you got re-knighted in the Iron Mountains, which makes you, I guess, 7 times knighted. Is that how that works?
I don't think the rule book encourages that that particular
interpretation.
Version.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, but let me be clear. The Iron Mountains did re-knight me in the 3 belts I had, and it was as touching a knighting ceremony as you can imagine. Every time one of my squires gets knighted,
mm-hmm.
I try and beat that bar. And I'm not saying I succeed. The guy who wrote the ceremony was he was my roommate at the time, and he was my friend. We were roommates for maybe 10 years, and he was always a good friend to me. I liked him, and he was a natural amtgard leader. And he basically decided to write the ceremony that way, and it was especially touching because he reunited me for crown, and I thought he was one of the best crown knights the Iron Mountains had at that time,
Right.
and he was a close friend of mine. And Cedric knighted me for Flame, and Cedric was one of my best friends for many years. And I thought he was as good a natural leader as you'll ever find. Like, his Flame Knight service is outstanding, but in some ways he's a better Crown Knight. But anyway, he knighted me for that, and then Thor knighted me for Sword, and so that was all very touching because these are all guys I love and whose game in their respective order I entirely respected and supported.
Mm-hmm.
And then Leaf was the Emperor. He dropped the sword for Serpent.
Yeah.
And I had so many friends of mine from all over the game who came up. Rogers Raiders, which is a fighting company out of Houston area, came and cooked the feast at an event in Colorado when they lived in Houston.
Jeez.
As a thing because they love me. I mean, that's a little arrogant, but it's true.
That's powerful.
Arthon, who was my first friend that I ever made in Amtgard, day tripped Rackus from Austin because he couldn't get off work.
And sat in the back yelling, "You can't spell suck without CK."
No, that was Sponge.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. That was.
But anyway, it was nice. It was very touching. And they did reconfirm all those belts, but the rule book doesn't really support that. So I don't claim it as anything other than a curiosity. But yes, it's true in some way. It's just not true in a real way.
You should wear 7 belts.
Shut
You'd look like a Final Fantasy character, and I do not care.
So, if I could set the scene for everyone as a spectator here, this was the first time that we had gone out to Rackus. We were going out there specifically because there was going to be a big jugging tournament that they were going to be filming part of. They were going to be airing this new tournament style that Michael had come up with, and then they were also going to be knighting him. And he mentioned Rogers Raiders. They didn't just come and cook some food, guys. They had a whole tent. They brought smokers. This was the most organized feast I had seen up to this point. The knighting took place in this enormous tent. I don't remember exactly how many people were there, but it felt like 300, 400.
It was in the 300 to 500 range. I don't know exactly.
And
I do know that tournament was the biggest in Amtgard history to that point,
yes,
with 106 players. Since I ran the tournament, I knew that.
Yes.
And it was the biggest tournament in Amtgard history for another decade until Keep finally knocked it off.
Until the next tournament that you ran?
System.
Yeah. We came back and told stories of the Michael Hammer of God style tournament. But you go in there and again, I wasn't as young in the game. I had hung out with you guys many times at this point. I had been over to some of your houses and hung out. We were what I would call Amtgard friends. When we were at events, we could easily talk. It was good. Like, hey man, it's been so good to see you. And so we're all sitting back in the corner with the people that were not directly up on stage with you there. And guys, it's hard to describe what 300-400 people glued to this stage looked like in full support of this person that was had already been an icon in the game and had really the sentiment from the audience was really, it's about damn time. It's about damn time that we see this the fourth belt come. And I don't know if it's still true today, but for a long time, the 4 belt that you wore was one that was made by someone in Neverwinter. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Is it this one right here?
No, that is not it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember that guy's name either. He was
Beautiful leather artisan.
Yeah, no, it was a gorgeous piece, but that was not the first one. When I got knighted, I was given one that is gorgeous, but it's cord only because it's got a bunch of sharp bits on it.
Okay.
And then I got a rope belt for field use that I wore.
Yep.
And then that gentleman from Neverwinter, who I cannot remember his name, reached out to me and said, "Hey, listen, I've got this new coating which makes the paint hold on a belt for many years, and I've always meant to make a 4-belter. Could I make you one?" What am I going to do? Say no? I was like, "Sure. Do you want some money for it?"
That's awesome.
So
yeah.
he made it, and I still have that one. I wear it sometimes. I've got that was, I mean,
It was a really, so my first big amtgard event, I saw someone get knighted, Sir Chohag. But that was your knighting, that 4-belter ceremony. Everybody that was in that audience knew that this was something that rarely comes around, something that they may never see in amtgard again. And that the people that were on stage with you really pointed out that it could not be happening to a nicer guy, and that it was just super deserving. And the greatest thing for me is that your story did not end there. It didn't end when you got your first belt. It didn't end when you got your second. And even after you got your fourth, that wasn't a lot of the things that the younger amtgarders know about you now, things like keep on the Borderlands and stuff like that, that all came long after you had gotten your fourth belt. So, I hear this talked about in Winter's Edge, and I assume it happens in other kingdoms as well, that the getting your belt is winning the game in some way, or that's the end game. You've beaten the final boss or something like that. And I've said this before, but Michael really, really lives this concept that that's just not true. It's not the end of the game, and it's not where you stop. It's really just where your journey begins. And I think that your career has really shown that.
So I agree with you, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about our award system, because you'd have to be an idiot not to realize the parts of it that are problematic.
Right.
And whereas for me, it has been very good, I know people for whom it's been very bad, and I love some of those people. So it's pretty hard to give it an unqualified recommendation. But I will say that one of the good things about it, one of the things that I think makes it worth saving, and most of the time I think it's more good than bad and it's worth saving.
Right.
And you just have to really fight hard to make it the best it can possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I think is most important about that is that when it works, it teaches someone what they can do to make the most out of this game they already love.
Yes.
And once you know what you can do, nothing can stop you.
Yes, absolutely.
And
damn.
And you can say I'm an avatar of this or whatever, but I've seen it from a lot of other people who the first time they run an event, they're losing their mind. And 2 years later, they can run it with their eyes closed, and it'll be better than ever.
Right.
And they can dream bigger and greater than they did the first time, and it's light years away. And it's the same with running kingdoms, and it's the same with hitting people with a stick.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, that's a tangent I could go on to forever, but we're not going to.
Right. So, hey, how do you get Hammer of God as part of your name? Did you just pick that, or was that assigned to you? Because sometimes people don't pick their full nickname or their persona name.
No, in fact, the story doesn't make sense in the internet world, but I'll tell you why my name is Michael Hammer of God. I wanted a name that sounded like a badass amtgarder, just like everybody else did.
Yep, that's why I'm
But
cabbage.
I also thought it was pretty important when I'd have to cold call some kid to try and get him to come back, that I not speak to his mother on the phone and say, "This is Dargoth the Destroyer. Is Timmy there?"
Okay, yeah.
So I took Michael because it's friendly and easy. And I took Hammer of God, not just because it's badass, but because as a new college kid from a brand new kingdom, I was going to make damn sure that those pricks in the Burning Lands and those double pricks in the Emerald Hills
Double pricks.
knew who the heck I was.
Okay.
We didn't like those guys very much.
No, that's totally fair. Okay.
Well,
so...
I have a lot of friends in the Emerald Hills now. It was a different world.
Wild Wild West, right?
yeah.
It was the Wild West in a lot of ways, most of them not good.
Right. So that often gets abbreviated as imhog, and I'm told that's wrong. Is there any particular reason, or is that just hearsay?
There was a time when I didn't prefer mhog. I have grown more accepting in my old age. People can call me mhog. They can call me mog. They can call me the Hog Father.
We'll get a Terry Pratchett reference in there.
Whatever they want to call me, it's all fine. I prefer to be Michael. So if people ask me, I'm like, yes, I'm Michael. And I will admit, there can be some real joy when you meet a new kid and you just say, hey, I'm Michael. And then, 6 months later or whatever, they realize, oh, he's that Michael.
Yeah. He's the Michael, actually, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But they didn't do me any favor putting me in the damn rule book, because now every time I say I'm Michael, they're like, are you in the rule book? I want your hammer.
Hammer.
So we have talked quite a bit up to this point about your early amtgard career and your knighthoods and things like that. I want to shift focus to some of the things that are going on right now. You've been in the game a long time. We covered 30 years in 2018. What do you have? What do you have going on in amtgard right now? What do you see as some of the things that are going to carry amtgard for another 30 years? And I know that was two different questions.
And also a hell of a tough question.
Yeah, it is.
So I can tell you some of the things. I'm going to say one thing first.
Okay.
After I was super sick in 2016, I set myself a few goals toward proving that life cannot kill me. And I achieved those goals, but the fact is, in achieving them, I realized that life didn't kill me, but I cannot be what I was in some ways. I'll give you an example. I wanted to be king up here in Polaris. I felt like Polaris is a kingdom that was largely my vision. Like, I moved up and started playing in Wisconsin and realized it was really natural to have a kingdom between Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And then realized the two groups totally hated each other. Or the two main groups. There were a bunch of ancillary groups, but the two main groups, the one main group in Minnesota and the one main group in Wisconsin, hated each other. So building a kingdom up here was just going to be a pain because the two main groups hated each other. And that's not true at all now. They love each other. Everybody gets along. We do fine. We had the most successful drive to kingdom I could have wished for. Now, it helped that I conceived of this idea during the time I was in amtgard leadership. I was the XCOM chair, which was sort of as close as amtgard got to a president.
Yeah.
During that time. And I did that for 4 or 5 years until 2016 when I got sick and couldn't. But during that time, I had all the ideas of, hey, this is exactly what it's going to take to not just get through the kingdom process, but to annihilate the kingdom process and to pull my group together so that when we get through the kingdom process, we all love each other and want to be successful as a kingdom beyond just getting through the process. And it was almost unfair in a way to have our kingdom have all those advantages because it was so easy to get it done. I mean, you know, the rules say you got to have 75 people in one park or in one place once a month for a year.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have less than 100 at any of ours, except one that was in the dead of winter. And that one we had 92.
God.
And our average was like 115 or something. It was unbelievable. But it was because we had a plan. We spent a year talking about the plan, and then we executed the plan. And we farmed out the 12 days as mini events. Different people ran them. They had budgets and plans and support and all the thing. And we raised money to help pay for gas to get people to these events for the 2 years leading up to it. There was just a lot of organizational steps that we could take because I knew all the ins and outs, and it put us ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I really wanted to be king of Polaris because of that. And I wasn't the first king up here, but I was like fifth, I don't know. I was king, and it was after I was sick, and I enjoyed it, and I believe I did a good job of it. But it was more work than I want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And of all the big projects I've done, being king it's sort of a medium-sized project in my opinion. It's not as hard as building Keep to be the biggest event in Amtgard.
That's fair.
It's not as hard as building a brand new kingdom. Like, I'm not saying it's nothing, but it was too much for me, and it's not what I consider huge.
Right.
So I've just had to moderate what I think I can do.
Yeah.
So given that, the answer to your question of what I'm doing, I'm still on our board up here in Polaris, and I'm trying very hard to pay attention to the good of the game from a mundane standpoint. I have a couple of squires who are still getting close to graduation, and I'm going to hang out and make sure that they get through before I retire. One of them, I promised her I'd stick around until she graduated. And the other one, I told him when I squired him, I'm not promising anything, but at this point, I think I'll make it.
Nice.
He's getting close, and I'm not taking any more after that. And I'm not going to ride off into the sunset. I still love the people and I love the hitting, but I'll probably do those things more casually, and I won't worry about the management.
Yeah.
When I pushed for us to switch to a senatorial model, I thought there was a pretty high chance I'd be a senator one day for a term or two. I don't think that's likely anymore. It's not that I don't still believe that the senatorial model is the right way to run the comm of Amtgard. I think it's way better than asking the monarchs to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just an investment I'm less willing to make. We're getting to where almost half the kingdoms do it now, so that's a good change, and I like it. I think it's very positive. It makes the comm more effective. The comm still has a problem being effective, and I haven't figured out the right answer to it. And it's just because 20-person committees aren't effective.
Nope.
Right.
On the other hand, I want all the kingdoms to have representation really badly, which is why I don't have a better solution. I think about that sometimes in my spare time and try and figure out a better model for that. I think AI is doing really well. I mean, one of the absolute highlights of my term as XCOM chair was something I had nothing to do with. You know, when the Burning Lands gave Amtgard to Amtgard,
Mm-hmm.
we should never underestimate how big a gift that was. You know, I went around at that clan and thanked every Burning Lander I could find personally, because it was the sign of a good group of Amtgarders trying to do right by the game, and it's very, very nice to see that happen.
And
I think AI is doing the right thing. I mean, the whole crap with the trademark is stupid. And I think the guy's a grifter. But frankly, we were shitty to him too, and some of that is because I got sick. Right? We on the first incarnation of AI, we agreed to try and talk to him first, and I was the one trying to talk to him.
Right.
And then I got sick.
Well, fingers crossed. That is, we are mostly across that bridge by now.
Yeah, I think we're most of the way through that, but we'll see. I think so. And I'm also excited that we're starting a new rule book, although I think we did ourselves a disservice not having a active rules change process for V8.
Yeah.
How do you mean?
So under V7, we had an active rules change process where kingdoms would propose rules changes. They'd come forward 1 year. If they got voted, then they'd get play tested for a year.
Gotcha.
If they got voted on after that, they'd stick. And we basically had a way to amend the rule book instead of rewriting the whole rule book.
Right.
And it did cause a little bit of problems, especially because V7 wasn't very well balanced anyway. So when you're trying to balance it with Band-Aids, it got a little bit of a hodgepodge at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, if you're going to have a new rules edition every 10, 12 years anyway, I'd rather let it get a hodgepodge at the end, because that rules revision process gives the populace of amtgard direct input into the rules and gives us an understanding of what people really like and really don't like, in a way that having people, even very smart and very gifted game designers, and I think the V8 team had 2 or 3 of those people who were very smart and very gifted game designers, but even they had the advantage of having 10 years of this rules process, writing new rules and updating them and making the changes and passing them through the comm, that I think really gave them a leg up on how to write it correctly. And I understand right after V8 passed that you wanted to say, hey, we're not going to have rules changes for a while, because the change from V7 was really big.
Yes.
And there would have been lots of pressure to, hey, let's just switch back because we don't want to bother to understand V8. And the first year, there probably would have been 30 or 40 proposals that were of that nature.
Right.
And the second year, there probably would have been 20. But by the third or fourth year, we're going to have a whole generation of kids who've only played V8. And those people deserve a right to go and try and change rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because we've already started V9 now, there's no pressure on the comm to restart the rules revision process. It's still in our governing documents, so it might happen, but there's just not a lot of pressure on it. And then that meeting is long anyway, so the comm's like, well, let's not add that. It'll just make the meeting take too long. I think it's a mistake. I don't think it's critical. I'm not like, oh, amtgard's in danger itself here. I just think it's a mistake. And hopefully, those of y'all who are listening to this, who are part of the V9 process, when it passes, sure, you can put rules revisions on hold for a couple of years. But after that, you got to restart them, because that gives the people a voice. We play this fantasy game where we call ourselves kings and knights and whatever. But one of the real strengths of our game, from my opinion, is it's democratic at its core. And I want it to stay that way.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, Cabbage, you grew up in
V7.
In V7, yeah. And I was V6 and then spent most of my amtgard career in V7. And you may not tie it together, but and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Michael, but what he's referring to, you would have known as the Inter-Kingdom Rules Committee.
Yeah, no, I remember some of this.
Yeah, no, it was the Inter-Kingdom Rules Committee that was the first iteration of that. You're right.
Yep. It was nice knowing that our little park could cast our vote with our kingdom to decide how we wanted some of these things to go. And playtesting is the way that you balance everything, right? I mean, the players are going to find the loopholes.
I mean, it seems like more and more they're trying to survey everything out ahead of time and use data to make them. I don't know how to say this, a more perfect first revision.
Yeah.
But, as much faith as I have in that process, they're never going to get it perfect on the first try, and there should be some amendment process to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical, and I also think that we're taking a gamble, not because I don't trust the V9 crew. The people I know on it are very, very good, actually. But the fact is, V8 is such a huge upgrade from V7 that people who expect us to be able to iterate that well and to be that much better than V8 are probably hoping for too much.
Yeah, they're
and
setting
that has
themselves
more to
up
do
for
with how
disappointment.
bad V7 was, but I just think it's a lot to ask.
Yeah. So
And maybe nobody thinks that's what they're getting, but I've definitely had some guys, and I don't think I would call them young. They're 6 years in the game or something, who feel like, yeah, here's all the terrible things about V8, and we're going to fix them all, and we're not going to break anything else.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, that's good. I hope you're right, but I would test the crap out of this because it worries me. I know how fragile these systems can be.
how many rules revisions have you seen in your time? What version did you start
That's
on?
mean.
No. It lets me tell another classic little story that I like.
Oh, beautiful.
Please do. We're getting close to
I've
the
been
end,
playing.
and we usually like to wrap it up with a story. So go.
Okay,
Tell
well,
us. Yeah.
this isn't a long story. This is just an anecdote, but that's okay.
Okay.
This is I've been playing amtgard since healers had 32 spell points.
Holy shit.
In V4, healers had 10 points at each of levels 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
At level 4, they got 2 extra spell points. At level 5, they got 3 spells that came out of their second level spell points. And at level 6, they got 3 spells that came out of their third level spell points. So it was V4, and that's what V4 did. So I've been playing since healers got 32 spell points.
Healer was my first love, my first class that I got to 6. So it warms my soul to know that it was at one point, if not the most powerful, at least one of the most powerful classes.
That's a lot.
It certainly had the most spell points. And let's be clear. In 7 and 6 and 5 and 4, where lives were a very limited resource, having 8 more for your team made you very, very important.
Yeah.
I kind of miss that. I miss the lives aspect that they took out in V8.
Yeah, that's an iteration I'd love to see, is a way to bring that back in without endangering the other goals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will tell you one more thing. This is a lesson from my point of view that I wish everybody who's young and wants to see role play be more significant in amtgard should think about. One of the events that had one of the very best reputations for being a role play event was literally never a role play event. It was designed as a military simulation. But the thing it did is it gave you one set of lives for the weekend.
Oh, that's good.
So death had a high price. So people tried really hard to solve problems without combat. So they role played a lot.
Oh. Yeah.
And that event was called Knoblander. And I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years trying to figure out how to do Knoblander under V8. And I haven't done it on my own. I've brought in some of these guys in their late 20s who are, 8-10 years in the game, who really are great at V8 and understand the back and forth and understand game theory and really should be the right people to help me with this project. And even with their help, I haven't figured out the right way to do it. But Knoblander in play because death had such a high cost. And I'm not saying I want every event to do that, ditching's my favorite place, and ditching death has the lowest cost.
Right.
But the fact is, there's a lot of value in role play, from my point of view, and giving it stakes makes it easier and better.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that.
So I want to give you a chance to tell us a funny story to close it out, Michael. But before you do that, because you brought up Knoblander, I want to tell a story. So back several years ago, my company gets a call from Michael Hammer of God and says, I would like for the Triads to be mercenaries for me at this event called Knoblander, where it's persistent. You have your lives for the entire event, so death has a very high cost, and he explained some more of the details about how Knoblander worked and what we would be up for. And we were going to be going up against another one of the rogue branch-off companies that I mentioned earlier, the Justicars. And this was... They had just now gone through a pretty big power shift in the Justicars, and they were getting rebuilt. And so this was going to be because they were a much more powerful company than we were before that. More organized, more resources, more armor, more everything, right? But because of this power shift that they had at the time, where a particular person that had been the leader of the company for a long time had both had some health problems and also just had been in the game for so long that he was drifting out. We stood a chance against them, and this was going to be our first big pit against another company that was now of equal skill to where we were. And so we get there, and my very first experience there is Michael takes all of the Triads down to the tavern, gets us all of our gear, and the way that they did gear is you actually got a playing card that was laminated, and if you didn't have a card that said board, you couldn't go board. You know, if you didn't have a card that said short sword, you couldn't fight with a short sword. You know, these were...
If they killed you, they'd loot you.
Yeah, if you got killed, they would loot your stuff from you, just like, you know, classic D&D campaign sort of stuff, right?
Right.
So your card represented the physical item that you're actually carrying, right?
Right. So they couldn't take your board away, but they would take your card, and then you don't have a board.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So we're serious about this. We go buy glow sticks and attach them to our arrows, the little bitty tiny
Those
glow
were
sticks.
awesome, by the way.
And so they worked as tracers. We had archers that would fire, and it worked as a tracer for everyone else. We spec'd everyone out. You know, this was at a time in the game where you didn't have the stipulation on spell balls that we have now, where, you know, you can only carry 4, you can only carry whatever. So you could just have bags and bags of spell balls. Your warriors would wear like fanny packs, basically turned backwards, so that your casters could just reach down and grab the spell balls. We're having a really good time. We get back to camp after our first sweep, and we bring all of our loot because we've killed all of these people. And Michael pulls me aside and says, all right, Flo, I need you to do something for me. And I said, yeah, what is it? And he hands me this bag of, you know, looking at this in the roleplay terms, I was basically handed all of the gold that the sheriff of Nottingham had been able to amass. And he says, go hide this. And don't tell me where it is, so that if I'm captured, they can't interrogate it out of me. And so I run off into the woods through poison ivy and everything else, and it's 1 a.m. And hide this this sack of gold. And the night goes on. Some fun things happen. Some, of course, problems come up because amtgard's going on for 24 hours, and people get tired and angry and whatever else. But it reaches the next day, and Mike says, "Oh, you guys did such a good job. Thank you so much for doing all of that. I need you to go get the gold." I put the gold in the forest at 1 a.m.
Yeah, that shit's gone.
And I didn't think to, you know, mark where the gold might be or anything like that. So I head out and I come back. Mike's got this really bright expression because, I mean, there's no way we're going to lose. We have so much money. And he says, "Okay, Flo." And I said, "Mike, I got bad news." And he said, buddy, it's okay. We're going to be able to work through whatever the bad news is. I said, Mike, the money's gone. He said, we're screwed, Flo. And
Hey.
so...
I got to point out, in the end, we weren't screwed. We pulled the win out of our ass.
We
But
did. We did.
It was bad. I agree.
I was almost the reason that our entire team lost, and it was because Michael trusted me with all of our money, and I gave it to the fairies in the woods. I assumed that bag of gold still sitting out there somewhere in the forest. But yeah, we always try to end with a fun, funny story. You've been in long enough that I'm sure you have quite a few. What do you think would be a good story to take us out on? This is always the toughest, easy question.
It really is.
Well, no, it's hard to come up with a good, funny story on the spot. I'll tell one that I'm not allowed to tell around here anymore because everybody's heard it too much and they hate it.
Oh, please, yeah.
But I will say it's
the statute of limitation is up. It's fine.
Well, I mean, you guys haven't heard it, so it'll be fine. But it's an old story from way back. But we had a quest, and I think there's not much to match a really good quest. That's a place where I think the company dynamic can really shine. Is a competitive quest where it's sort of a World Quest style thing, and the companies all go in and try to be successful over the course of a day.
Mm-hmm.
I have some of my best memories of the early amtgard days are those kind of things. And it was partially because the Tigers were just great to do that stuff with, and partially because it's a very good kind of content. But we have this quest, and I don't remember a lot of the details of exactly how it worked. Other than there was a lot of undead. We're busy trying to fight the undead. And there's 6 of us, and we're surrounded by this horde of undead, and they were mostly little chump undead that we could kill easily, but then there were like these ghouls who would pop up, and it was, maybe double our numbers of NPCs.
Right.
Because it was the big finale. So we're basically really under the gun, even though a lot of it we could handle. And they've got this ghoul or something. I don't remember what kind of undead he was, but some kind of undead who keeps throwing the dagger of infinite penetration at us and then making us stop and return it to him. Like probably 2 or 3 times we're trying to fight our way down this path against the swarm, trying to keep our guys alive and keep rolling. And he keeps throwing this thing and, breaking our shields or killing our people and then asking us to return it. So I just turned to my squire Vlar, who is our wizard, and I was like, will you sphere that fucking dagger right now? And so he spheres the dagger. We get through to the end, and at the end, the quest master says, well, this team got this prize and that team got that prize. And Tiger Clan got nothing because they destroyed the dagger of infinite penetration, which should have been their prize. I didn't feel too sorry because what the hell?
Yeah, no,
I was not having that shit thrown at me anymore.
Yeah. You destroyed your only prize. Oh, God. Well, I mean, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad more people will get to hear your story. I hadn't heard as much as I got tonight, and honestly, I'm a little starstruck. So, again, huge thanks for coming on. Is it time to do the rollout?
Yeah. Do you have anything that you wanted to leave the audience with?
Yeah, plug something cool if you got
last words. If you have, I know that we're in this online environment, but any events coming up, just anything that you'd like to say on the way out?
Yeah, sure. I'll say something. Keep isn't that far for you guys. It's back in Indiana next year. It'll probably shrink due to the pandemic, same as everything else does. But before the pandemic, it was the biggest event in amtgard. Any of y'all who haven't been to a really giant event, you've got one that's don't have a map in front of me, but I'm guessing it's 8 to 10 hours from you guys. Like, it's a day's drive. You can do it. I would say think about it. See if you can figure out how to do it, because playing Amtgard with hundreds of people on our 2 castles, it's an unmatched experience, especially if you're new and you haven't been out and played these crazy giant games with big crowds. It's a thing everybody should do once at least.
Yeah. Are you assuming things return to normal? Are you going to go in 2021?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll definitely go.
I'll be there.
I'm not taking any leadership role, but I'm definitely going.
Fantastic.
All right, Winter's Edge, you heard that. We have a call to arms to keep on the Borderlands.
Yep, I'm in. I can only fit 4 people in my car, though, so we'll have to figure that out, but it's fine.
We have Thunderhammer Camp? I think we'll do Thunderhammer Camp.
Oh, man, I got to make the short shorts before then.
You do.
All right, well, thanks, everyone, for listening. Make sure to give this a like on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe. Like it on whatever platform that you're on. It helps us out quite a bit. Be sure to keep tuning in and pay attention to our Facebook page. We announce our guests at least a few days in advance whenever we can. Thanks, everybody.